to motor west. Come on and travel a mile away. Take the highway, that's the best. Come on and get your kicks on the Route 66. It winds from Chicago to LA. More than 2,000 miles all the way. Come on and get your kicks on the Route 66. Hey, now you go through St. Louis, Joplin, Missouri, Oklahoma City looks mighty pretty. Over sea, Amarillo, and Gallup, New Mexico, Flagstaff, Arizona, don't forget Winona, Kingman, Barstow, San Bernardino. One, you get a hip to this, a timely tip. When you make that California trip, come on and get your kicks on the Route 66. Looks mighty pretty. Overseas, Amarillo, and Gallup, New Mexico, Flagstaff, Arizona, don't forget Winona, Kingman, Barstow, San Bernardino. One, you get a hip to this, a timely tip. Right now when you make that a California trip, come on and get your kicks on the Route 66. Come on and get your kicks on the Route 66. Come on and get your kicks on the Route 66. Yeah!
Well, good afternoon. What an energizing rendition of Route 66. That was wonderful. I'm Steve Murray. I'm the director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History in Montgomery, Alabama, and I'm so delighted to be with you and the American Center in Moscow for this talk today. I am the head of a state agency, as I mentioned, called the Alabama Department of Archives and History, and so my comments to you today are going to be pretty firmly rooted in Alabama's history and hopefully talk about some of the things that perhaps you have some familiarity with Alabama's role in American history, but we'll explore some of those and begin by going really deep into the early indigenous history of this part of North America. Just to do a little bit of placing where we are. So Alabama is red on this map. Alabama attained statehood in 1819. It was the 22nd of the 50 states to be added to the Union. And it's in a region that we typically call the southeast or the deep south portion of the United States, right there along the Gulf Coast. And we are neighbored to the west by Mississippi, to our north by Tennessee, to the east by Georgia, and to our south by Florida. I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of some of the characteristics of Alabama. The state has an area of a little over 52,000 square miles, so roughly the same size geographically as Greece or Tajikistan. And Alabama is the 30th of the United States in terms of area. Its population is about 5.2 million people, or roughly equivalent to both Ireland and Singapore, just to give you a frame of reference. And we're right in the middle of the states, 24th of the 50 in terms of population. And our economy, our gross domestic product, is about $325 billion per year, so roughly equivalent to the economies of Finland and Vietnam. And again, roughly in the center of the list of states at about 27th in terms of GDP and economic output. But there are some areas where Alabama occupies some superlative spaces. This is a map of the Southeast showing the physiographic regions. And a lot of what I'm going to speak to you about today has very strong connections to the land, to the geology and geography of Alabama, and how geology and geography have shaped its history, its human history, its natural history in a way that is really difficult to overstate. And you can see, again, Alabama is right here in the center of the three states, kind of at the middle of the map here. And that orange and dark blue area that you see coming down from the northeast are the Appalachian Mountains. So Alabama occupies a space at the transition from the southern regions of Appalachia, it's a very ancient mountain range, down into what we call the coastal plain. And that diversity of geology and geography have contributed significantly to Alabama standing as one of the most geological and most biologically diverse parts of North America. And you recall, we're somewhere in the middle of the pack in terms of area and population, but Alabama is the fourth most biodiverse state in the US, and it's by far has the greatest biodiversity of any of the states east of the Mississippi. It boasts more than 6,350 species in 64 distinctive terrestrial ecosystems. It has more than 132,000 miles of rivers and streams and several dozen marine ecosystems. And as I said, that distinctiveness has contributed really significantly to its history, going back to the earliest human occupation. The first people to live in southeastern North America arrived here about 14,000 years ago and lived over millennia, initially as hunters of very large mammals that roamed the landscape here, mammoth, mastodon, bison. Over time, by about 1,000 years ago, a lot of those mega fauna had begun to disappear from the landscape, or had disappeared from the landscape. And there was a new influence that was emerging from the Mississippi River Valley. So the Mississippi River is that large waterway that you see toward the left side of the screen here. And this new influence was technological, it was cultural, it was an awareness of how to farm improved corn. And it was improved agricultural techniques that created the ability to have a very stable society. And these early indigenous people became expert farmers. That ability to grow sustainably very reliable food supplies meant that society became much more stable. They tended to settle down into one place for longer periods of time and build sustained economic relationships, political, social, cultural relationships with other groups of people around them. And we call this the Mississippian era. And it's an era that difficult to put precise dates on it, but it's for about a 500-year period from 1000 to around 1500. There was a great deal of social and political and cultural characteristics that were in common across the entire southeastern part of North America and up into what we call the Midwest region. One of the characteristics of this society is that they were mound builders. They built large mounds using soil excavated from nearby areas with really advanced engineering knowledge and the ability to create these structures that were long lasting, that were used for ceremonial purposes. Later on, they were used for funerary purposes, but this was a core part of their society. And you can see here one of the really significant historic sites in Alabama is called Moundville in the western part of the state. And Moundville was the largest of these Mississippian era mound cities. And at its height had a population of several thousand people, but more significantly had tremendous amount of influence socially and economically across large swaths of area around the rest of Alabama and in adjoining areas that we would now call the southeastern states. Here's a ground level view of what one of those looks like today. It's a beautiful facility, archaeological site that is administered by the University of Alabama. That society began to change, as I said, about 500 years ago. In 1540, a Spanish explorer named Hernando de Soto led an expedition through the southeast, and it brought warfare that was quite detrimental to the native population, but more significantly, European diseases to which the indigenous population had no resistance, and there was a massive population loss. Some estimates of as much as 90% of the native population was lost in the years following that European contact. De Soto and his expedition were repelled by the Mississippians who lived in what is now Alabama, and they did not return for more than a couple of hundred years to the interior of this part of the continent. But their presence had really significant effects on the local population. And this map is showing you what the Southeast looked like on the eve of the American Revolution, which began officially in 1776, 250 years ago this year. But in 1773, we're showing you the outline of the modern states. Of course, they didn't exist that way at the time, but just to give you some sense of place here. Where I am sitting right now was in the very heart of the Creek Nation, and the Creek people were one of about 5 dominant indigenous tribes or traditions who lived here in the southeastern part of North America, the others being the Cherokee, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and then the Seminole. And there were very vibrant town-based communities, extensive trade that was underway here. These are the Native Americans who began to interact with the British, the Spanish, and the French colonial presences that arrived in North America, initially developing mutually beneficial trade relationships, especially with the British. That's going to begin to change after the American Revolution. So about 250 years ago, life in this part of North America begins to change in dramatic ways for lots of people. You see in the darker green over to the right side of the map, the colonies of South Carolina and Georgia. They're going to soon become the states of South Carolina and Georgia and the young United States. And there's going to be growing pressure to gain access to the very fertile farmland that exists in this deep South region of North America in the early national period of the young United States. Just to give you a sense of what some of these indigenous people look like, due to misrepresentation in American popular culture for many decades, the people here in our own country and people around the world often have very narrow understanding of what Native Americans looked like, how they dressed, the kinds of regional distinctions that characterize them. These are portraits of 3 Creek leaders whose portraits were painted during treaty negotiations in Washington, D.C. in the 1820s, very Southeastern in their dress, but also have adapted some European styles and some aspects of their clothing that you can see here, but a rich, rich culture that was challenged in really significant ways by the policies of the young United States. One of the things that's going to challenge the ongoing viability of these cultures is that the Industrial Revolution is taking off in Great Britain at this time. So mechanization is happening, factories are being built for the first time, people are going to work in large industrial settings, and those large industrial settings are consuming as much raw cotton as they can get because the rate of manufacturing of cloth textiles just skyrockets at this time during the Industrial Revolution. So we're talking about the period 1790 into the early 1800s. And that creates economic opportunity for people who have access to good cotton growing land. And there's really no better land available in the world at the time for the types of cotton that these British factories need than in what we'll come to think of as the Deep South states. So Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and later on, a little bit to Texas. What that does is set up a really significant period of conflict, and ultimately, moving forward to the 1830s, the United States is going to adopt an official policy of removal of indigenous peoples who live east of the Mississippi. This map is showing you the routes of removal of several of these tribes by the 1830s. You see the smaller areas shaded orange, yellow, blue, purple down in Florida. See, these are what's left by the 1830s of these indigenous nations that once covered the entire Southeast. By the 1830s, they've been confined to these small portions of the southern states. And then by the mid-1830s, they are actually going to be forcibly removed by the U.S. Army to what was then known as Indian Territory. It's now the state of Oklahoma. Many of them went there. Some others went to other adjoining states. They were able to stay in places like Mississippi, some down in Florida. But for the most part, the greatest portion of these populations were removed to Indian Territory to really create space for continued expansion of the young United States and its economy that is going to be very much focused in the Deep South on one crop in particular. Not all of the Native Americans were removed from Alabama, and today we have one federally recognized tribe. There are about 20 federally recognized tribes that exist today that have origins in what we now call Alabama. One of those still has a physical home here in the state, and they're called the Porch Band of Creek Indians, and have become very successful as a people in maintaining their culture and in diversifying their economic activity to include entertainment and industry and high-tech manufacturing. Really a tremendous success story of a Native American group that has become fully, had an opportunity to become fully realized as a modern entity and in a nation that is able to care for its own citizens, but also to contribute to the larger communities around them. Their nation is down in the southern part of the state, but as I said, they have really significant economic activity all over Alabama and even around North America and internationally now. I'm going to come back to this map multiple times because I said how important the land is. Another way that the land is very important is if you zoom in a little bit and you see this kind of white jagged line that runs from the lower right side of the map up to the upper left side. That's the fall line that separates the very lower foothills of the Appalachian Mountains that I mentioned earlier from the coastal plain, which is this very sandy, rich agricultural land that extends from about the midpoint of Alabama down to the Gulf Coast. And this transition is very important. The fall line marks where, if you're moving north, where river navigation ended, because it's where you reach these higher elevations and this hard rock that created rapids all along the fall line. But it also marks this transition in the quality of the ground for cultivating cotton. And keep in mind this kind of swath of green, these different shades of green here that you see labeled as the coastal plain, because you're going to recognize that again here in just a moment. Stepping back again to 1790, as we were talking about earlier, and what's happening in the international economy at this time, this Southwest territory, as it's labeled on this map, is that really rich agricultural land that the young United States were beginning to look at more and more and developing pressure to gain access to this land. And starting in about 1790, there was a mass migration as the Native American populations are being pushed out. New people are coming in from the Atlantic coast, being many what we call yeoman farmers. These are very self-sufficient people who did not engage in large-scale agriculture. They tended to run small family farms and tended to live in the mountainous regions and up in the hill country. But another group who came were those who came from the plantations that already existed in the Atlantic coast states. And they brought with them an enslaved labor force that would provide the labor for this new cotton cultivating economy that was going to develop. So you can see, jumping ahead, by 1860, this is showing you the population density of enslaved African Americans in North America at this time. And if you look at Alabama, you can see that same curve where the dark green on the physiographic map was. That rich agricultural land is also reflected here in the dark red band of where the enslaved laborers were concentrated, because that's where plantation agriculture is going to take off. Another image that reinforces the same notion here, this is a map from 1860 showing cotton cultivation, where each one of these dots on the map represents 2,000 bales of cotton cultivated in 1860. And you can so clearly again see that same deep concentration across the middle of Alabama, where cotton growing is going to be most concentrated. The African American population will be most concentrated. And you can see a similar, even deeper, darker concentration over in the Mississippi River Delta between the states of Louisiana and Mississippi further to the west. This is a depiction from 1860 of some of those enslaved laborers. This is from a publication called Harper's Weekly. You're actually seeing the city of Montgomery in the distance here across the river from a composite image of some of the types of labor that enslaved people were required to perform, heavily oriented toward agriculture, but also some early industry that was beginning to develop in the Deep South at the time, and as well as a great deal of domestic labor that was happening. What this made possible was a proliferation of an economic system that produced extraordinary wealth in the southern part of the United States in the first half of the 19th century. What you see on the upper right is a steamboat being loaded with cotton bales. Each one of these cotton bales weighed about 450 to 500 pounds of raw cotton that was being shipped downriver to Mobile, then put on larger ships to go to Great Britain initially, and then later on up into the northeastern part of the United States to be processed in cotton mills. What those exports represented, in 1850, cotton was responsible for 60% of the value of all U.S. exports. And think about that for a second. 60% of the value of all U.S. exports in 1850 was cotton. And of that 60%, Alabama was responsible for about 23% of that cotton. So extraordinary value that was going out of this cash crop that was being cultivated and generating the wealth that produced the kinds of homes that you see here. This is an example from up in northwest Alabama called the Forks of Cypress. That created this system to which the South became so strongly attached, created significant political division within the United States. Think back to the map we saw of where African American populations were in 1860, overwhelmingly in the South. And there was a steady and growing divide between the southern and northern states within the US by the middle part of the century over what was going to happen as the country continued to grow west. In 1860, a new party, a recently created party called the Republican Party, nominated Abraham Lincoln to be its nominee for president. And Lincoln and the Republicans had a platform in that presidential election not to dismantle slavery as it already existed in the Deep South, but to restrict the further expansion of slavery into the new westward states and territories that were already beginning to be populated. So we're talking about the states where Nat King Cole was singing about Route 66, further west from where we are, from where I am today. But the argument was about the future of the nation. And Lincoln was so avowedly opposed to the further expansion of slavery that the southern states knew that they would, if he was successful, that the southern states would be outnumbered in Congress, and the very delicate compromise that had already always prevailed from the origins of the nation up to 1860, where the slaveholding and free states had maintained a balance of power in Congress, that would not be sustainable any longer. And the slaveholding states were concerned that they would be outnumbered. So they decided in 1861 to secede from the United States. Our country was less than 100 years old at the time, and Alabama was among those who voted to officially separate from the United States. Alabama further invited other slaveholding states to send representatives to Montgomery, and in our state capital seen here in this photo, they created the government of the new Confederate States of America in early 1861. And its first and only president, Jefferson Davis, was inaugurated in February of that year. And this is a photograph of that occasion taking place. That is followed by 4 years of really horrific war that divided our nation. It cost families, communities, extraordinary cost, but it also had the consequence of ending the institution of slavery in the United States. So 4 million people in 1865 who had formerly lived as chattel slaves, property of other individuals, moved from slavery into freedom. About 435,000 of those were in Alabama. And at the end of the war, there is a sense of both devastation on the one hand, in terms of the physical cost of war over all those years, but also the extraordinary opportunity that comes in freedom, as this very large population now has the opportunity to realize the promise of freedom that originated in the American Revolution. We enter then a period that lasted about a decade called Reconstruction. And Alabama is one of the Deep South states where this period is characterized by significant violence and uncertainty. These are decisions being made about how the United States is going to reconstitute itself, and how are these southern states in particular, where you had former masters and former enslaved now living not nominally as equals in this new under this federal system, but very uneasy equals, and there's going to be a lot of dispute about power relationships and how all that's going to work out. For a brief period, a brief few years, African Americans are able to win election to public office, and you can see in this 1872 photograph of our state senate, there are 5 African American members here, as well as other political allies of theirs who were elected during these years. But this isn't going to last long. It's a brief period where public education was actually made available to children of both races. Property rights of women were recognized in Alabama and other southern states. But there's going to be, in this great control for power, a reclaiming of power by the mid-1870s by many of those planters who had been involved in leadership in the state prior to the Civil War. And what that means is that African Americans will, again, nominally be protected by constitutional amendments that granted them citizenship and granted African American men the right to vote. But this begins a long period when the governments now controlled by white Democrats at the time are going to be able to restrict the voting activity of African Americans through intimidation, and later on through formal changes to state government that make it very difficult, specifically for African Americans and for poor white people, to be able to register to vote. This is the set of events that sets up later on some of the what we think of as the modern civil rights movement that you may be familiar with, where Alabama played a very leading role in advancing the rights of African Americans in the United States in the middle 20th century. What this creates, and this is a later photograph, but by the late 1800s and certainly into the early 1900s, what you see is both cultural segregation as well as statutory segregation. It becomes literally the law of the land that white people and African American people are divided. So even at a large public event like this, that you see on the screen, which is happening in the 1930s, they are separated by physical barriers, literally, and intermingling is not permitted. Let's go back to this map, talk about another physical feature that is important. And right in the center of the map, where you see that the tail end of the Appalachian Mountains come together, is around one of our major metropolitan areas now called Birmingham. And Birmingham didn't exist in 1870, but by 1871 it did, and it's because of the close proximity of iron ore, coal, and limestone, the three ingredients necessary for making iron. And between 1870s and 1920, Alabama is going to become the most heavily industrialized state in the South. In 1872, the state was producing 11,000 tons of pig iron, and by 1900, it's going to be producing more than 1 million tons of pig iron, and responsible for a significant portion of the iron production of the United States by the early 20th century. Develops into a storied history of coal mining and labor relations during the time. Other major industrial trends that happened during this time include timber industries and turpentine production, especially in the southern half of the state. You can see here this gentleman scoring the face of a pine tree to stimulate the sap flowing from the tree, where it would be collected and then processed at a turpentine mill that you see on the right there. And then another very important part of Alabama's industrial story is the development of textile mills here in the South. I mentioned that they were sending cotton to Great Britain and then to the northeastern United States, and that's always going to be true, but they also began to develop textile mills all throughout the South, where manufacturing comes closer to the source of the fiber material. And this is going to become a very important part of our industry all the way up until the late 20th century. Going back to our map again, another important physical characteristics up in the northern part of the state is the Tennessee River, this very rich natural resource that is in the 1930s as part of the New Deal response to the Great Depression is going to be dammed, and this generation of hydropower makes it possible for all of North Alabama to be electrified. And that then enables the expansion of new industries in that part of the state, which had been a really poor agricultural area, suddenly has these federally funded new industries that are coming into place, especially during World War II, as they are creating ordnance and other manufacturing. And then at the right, you see the continuation of a great shipbuilding tradition down on the coast in Mobile, as women start entering the workforce during World War II here as welders. Alabama really has a tremendous influence by the middle part of the 20th century in challenging this by now long-standing system of segregation and discrimination in public life. And they do that in a variety of ways. They do it through litigation and the leadership of important attorneys like Arthur Shores that you see here on the left. They do it through mobilizing organizations and mass movements like you see on the right. This is a church in Birmingham in 1956 where a leading civil rights organization is being organized in this time period. They do it through boycott, through demonstrations. A variety of methods become necessary for African Americans in the United States to convince the nation that something has to be done to better provide for their rights as citizens and to make it possible for them to live up to enjoy the same promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that had been so foundational in the creation of the United States back 250 years ago. These are both images from 1965 associated with the culmination of the Selma to Montgomery March. This was very influential in convincing Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which finally realized in a new way the rights that were promised to African Americans way back at the end of the Civil War by requiring protections for their ability to register to vote and then to exercise those votes. Today, this history of civil rights continues to be important to us as a key driver of tourism. In 2024, civil rights tourism in Alabama was responsible for about $325 million in economic activity. excuse me, you can go see the Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham today, or many people make pilgrimages to the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, where the infamous Bloody Sunday event occurred back in 1965. There are other historic sites that where plantations once existed that have received a new view and new type of interpretation that's being put in place by historic sites and museums that are now telling a much fuller version of our past, and one that honors the sacrifices and the contributions of all Alabamians. And then an incredibly important new player on the scene here in Alabama is an organization called the Equal Justice Initiative. It started as a legal services organization in the 1980s, serving people who are on death row or who have long-term prison sentences under suspect circumstances and the ways that their convictions came about. But in the last decade, EJI has become very involved in transforming the cultural landscape in Alabama and Montgomery specifically, with the creation now of 4 sites. Here are images of 2 of them: the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which is a monument to the African Americans whose lives were lost to terroristic violence between the late 1800s and into the middle and late 20th century. And then on the right, the Freedom Monument Sculpture Park, which is a wonderful artistic celebration of family and strength and endurance and ultimately freedom in the United States. These sites and others are bringing people from all over the world to Montgomery today. This is another major innovation that is another outgrowth of that electrification that happens up in the Tennessee Valley in the 1930s, and that is in the post-World War II era, the development of America's space program, in which North Alabama plays a very significant role. This is where all of the rocket engines were designed, built, and tested, was in Huntsville, Alabama, up in the northern part of the state, and played a key role in America's pursuit of the space race. And what's really fascinating is the spin-off results of that investment that took place back in the 1950s and 60s. Today, North Alabama has one of the highest concentrations of PhDs in the sciences and engineering anywhere in the United States. It has an incredibly robust bio research economy and sector led by the Hudson Alpha Institute, which is one of the world's leading institutions involved in genomic research and doing all kinds of amazing things related to searching for treatments for cancer and other life-threatening diseases. And also in the last really 30, 35 years, Alabama's economy has been transformed in manufacturing again. And that owes a lot to the arrival of the automotive industry. Alabama is now number 5 in the United States for auto manufacturing and number 2 for exports. That started with Mercedes-Benz, a German company now operating over in West Alabama, but we also have a presence here from Toyota, Honda, Mazda, Hyundai, and many of the companies that supply parts for those. Aviation and aerospace is another extremely consequential one. There are more than 300 aerospace companies in Alabama today. On the right, you see the facility of the United Launch Alliance up in North Alabama. It's now the largest rocket factory in the world. And on the left, down in Mobile, they manufacture Airbus civil aviation planes that many Americans and people around the world travel on every day now. Our culture is a rich one. Alabama is an extraordinarily beautiful state. This is a photograph down on our white sandy beaches down on the Gulf Coast that is also a major economic driver. Tourism is very responsible for a great deal of economic activity, bringing people from all over North America to see these beautiful beaches. It's just hard to describe how fine and soft the sand is, and usually very enjoyable water, depending on what's happening with the weather on any given day. But this has become an extremely important part of our economy. Some would say that this coastline has been overdeveloped. There are many areas where high-rise condominiums and hotels and resorts make it difficult to find a shot quite like this one. but it's still nonetheless very enjoyable and an important part of our state. This is a photograph I took from one of my favorite parts of Alabama. Give you a sense at the extreme other end of the state from the beaches. This is up in the northeastern corner of the state, almost to Tennessee. And this is where those Appalachian foothills are. This is in a little community called Mentone, a place that my wife and I love to visit, and have a cabin right here on the brow of Lookout Mountain and watch the sunset. Just a beautiful space. Our culture is rich. Alabama has the city of Mobile and the city of New Orleans will argue incessantly over who has the longest running Mardi Gras or carnival tradition. And Mobile can make a very strong case for that. But this is a springtime festival that involves parades that will go on for weeks. Again, an important driver of tourism, but a very important part of our traditional culture here that is still very much celebrated. And you can't talk about the state of Alabama without talking about the importance of college football, which is by far kind of the most popular cultural pastime. People plan their entire autumn schedules around this, weddings, family gatherings, all of those things take into account what the football schedule is for the state's two dominant teams, being the University of Alabama Crimson Tide and the Auburn Tigers. I'm a graduate of Auburn, so I profess to have some bias in this. And most Alabamians are expected when newcomers come here. One of the first questions they get asked is which team they're going to root for. We don't have any professional Major League Baseball or National Football League teams within the state. And so college sports really are extremely influential, and not only football, other sports as well, but this is one that is the undisputed champion in terms of the time and resources that are spent enjoying it. This is the institution where I work. I mentioned that we're the State Department of Archives and History, and we're located directly across from that state capitol where so much of our history unfolded, going all the way back to the middle part of the 19th century when Alabama left the Union and took a leading role in creating the Confederacy, all the way up to that 1965 settlement of Montgomery March that culminated at the state capitol, and is where Dr. Martin Luther King gave his famous speech saying that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And it's a very special place. I hope you will come to visit if you have an opportunity. Learn more about it online. Our website and our YouTube channel offer many hours of recorded programs if you're interested in learning more about Alabama's rich history. And with that, I'll be happy to take some questions. The first question is, what would you recommend to visit first in the state? That's a great question. I think that it's hard to argue with coming to Montgomery first as a starting point to get a good sense of the different opportunities you have around the state. Those Equal Justice Initiative sites that I mentioned truly are bringing people from all over the globe, and they're very much worth a visit if you can get here. But you really can't go wrong. There's wonderful music and food, and Birmingham, the beaches are another very popular destination, but I think I would put Montgomery at the top of the list. The second question is the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute a privately owned institution, or is it federally owned? It is a private nonprofit that has some support from the city of Birmingham and other local governments there in the central part of the state. It faces some of the same challenges that all nonprofits do in terms of funding and revenue generation, but it is one of the earliest of the museums in the United States devoted specifically to the history of the civil rights movement. There have been many more that have proliferated since then in Charleston and Memphis and Jackson, Mississippi. But the Civil Rights Institute was an early one and a very important one. What do people in Alabama like to do for fun? We have a wonderful climate for most parts of the year here, and it's a great area of the country if you enjoy being outdoors. The summertime here is hot and humid, and many people find it uncomfortable to be outside. But from October in the fall to May in the spring, we have a very mild climate and many wonderful opportunities for hiking and boating, fishing. So it's a great place to be outdoors. You'll find a lot of community gatherings. People like to come together and enjoy food. Some of those traditions of music that I mentioned are very popular pastimes as well. Are there any local dishes or foods from Alabama that you love? Barbecue is an especially important part of culture in the Deep South. This goes back and is one of several examples of where African American culture, so those enslaved peoples who were brought to North America against their will and then had to fight for so long for their rights as American citizens, brought with them traditions and cultural influences that have had really significant and beneficial impact on the people who live here in Alabama. Food being one of them. And barbecue is a great Southern tradition that involves typically slow cooking meat, whether it's pork or beef or chicken, and it's usually sauced. There are a lot of varieties of different types of barbecue sauce across the South, including in Alabama. And it's a good way to have a good heated discussion with your neighbor. You can get into a debate over which type of barbecue sauce you like best. Alabama today also has a really wonderful food scene. Birmingham in particular has become especially well known as a restaurant city. Many award-winning chefs and restaurants that are there. So if you especially are a fan of food, Birmingham's a great destination for you. There's another question about famous musicians or styles of music from Alabama. And I think we've had a really significant influence on two traditions in particular that come to mind, being the blues. A musician named W.C. Handy from up in the northern part of Alabama, African American, who helped to popularize and generate greater commercial success for another of those traditional African American cultural formats. Blues is a wonderful, heartfelt tradition featuring songs about heartache, and then the name the blues literally comes from the blues of kind of feeling a sense of dejection about something that's happening in your life. And it's a very humanistic, emotional musical tradition, musical style that's powerful. It's influenced by religion, Christianity, but just a wonderful American tradition that I encourage you to look up. W.C. Handy is a great one. And then another tradition that is related in some ways to that history of the blues is country music. One of the best known Alabamians is a singer named Hank Williams, who was very popular in the 40s and early 50s. Had a very distinctive country twang to his voice. Wrote beautiful lyrics, played guitar. This is a tradition that has some influence from those African American musical traditions. But Hank Williams took what was a Southern rural musical tradition and really popularized it across the country. And country music today is not, in some ways, is very different from the music that Hank Williams performed. But it does have its roots in the way that he popularized honky-tonk music, or hillbilly music, it was sometimes called, through radio station performances and traveling shows that he conducted all over the southern United States back in the middle part of the century. Another question here is which small town in Alabama do you think everyone should visit? There are some wonderful small towns. There's one that comes to mind down near the coast called Fairhope in Baldwin County. And Fairhope has its own special history. It was created by a colony of Northerners who wanted to conduct an economic experiment and shared ownership of land resources and creating what was a mostly very successful new community down there close to the beach. When it was started, it was a quite remote location, but today Fairhope is in one of the fastest growing, maybe the fastest growing county in Alabama, and it's a very popular destination. But beautiful shops and a waterfront area right there on Mobile Bay. Very nice restaurants and a lovely local culture. You can get a different vibe completely if you go up into that region that we were talking about earlier, the Black Belt, where I should mention the Black Belt, where we've talked about cotton cultivation and the concentration of the African American population, is really so named because of the dark black, rich soil that exists there that made it possible for agriculture to thrive there for so long. There are many wonderful small towns in the Black Belt that have a still very strong sense of community. There's a high level of poverty that exists in many parts of the Black Belt today. It has not realized the same level of success in reinventing its economic base as some other parts of the state have. And it's had some difficulty kind of restarting an economic engine that is in a sector where there's opportunity broadly for many of the people who live in that region. But still, if you're looking for a sense of community, of people who care about each other and look after each other, and where you can go have very traditional experiences, the Black Belt is a great place to look. Another of my favorites is a town called Sylacauga, Alabama. Sylacauga is in the eastern central part of the state, and Sylacauga is distinctive because it is the site of another very important mineral resource, particularly limestone marble, called Sylacauga marble, which is treasured by artists for being especially useful in marble sculpture. Sylacauga hosts a very large marble festival in the spring of every year. And if you just search for Sylacauga marble, you'll see some wonderful examples of sculpture that's come from that community. That marble has also been very important in architectural applications over the last 100 years and more, in some of our very prominent architecture in Washington, D.C. and other parts of the country where you can find that. And it actually lines all of the walls on the interior of the hallways of the building where I work. It's really a beautiful stone. What is your favorite place for hiking in the state? There's a wonderful, we're blessed to have some wonderful state parks as well as some national properties that are owned and managed by the National Park Service and other federal entities. So there's no shortage of great trails here. And one of the best is DeSoto State Park, which has the Little River Canyon. It's one of the deepest canyons in the eastern part of the United States that has just really beautiful trails and wonderful wildlife and places to camp. If you're an outdoors person, and if you enjoy camping, we have many wonderful opportunities to do that. Have you always lived in Alabama? If so, what keeps you there? I have lived in Alabama for 33 years now. I'm a native of another deep South state, Louisiana, and lived some in Texas, but came to Alabama to attend graduate school and then really have stayed here and built my life here. Alabama, like I think just about any place in the world, has things that I love about it. There are things that I think many of us always think maybe the grass is greener on the other side of the fence sometimes. Maybe we've got problems that aren't as significant in other parts of the world, but I've really never wanted to be any place other than this in 33 years. It's because of its physical beauty, because of the beauty of the people who live here, because of the richness of its history, wonderful neighborly people who are doing their best to create a space where all people can live up to their potential. And our systems don't always succeed in creating those kinds of environments where those opportunities exist. But there are plenty of people who want to see that happen. And I think it's a great place to make a living and to raise a family. There's a great question about accents. And I don't know if you think I have much of an accent. I think I probably have something of a moderate degree of an accent from the South. There are, I think as a whole within the United States, our regional distinctiveness in terms of accents and the way that people speak have tended to decline over the last half century. And a lot of that has to do with popular culture. We're all consuming some of the same culture that's manufactured in California or New York, or increasingly from any corner of the world through social media. And you can go to parts of the Alabama, just like you can in parts of Appalachia or to the northeastern states, and still find people who have quite defined and pronounced accents. Those folks who have a very finely tuned ear can sometimes tell an Alabama accent apart from a South Carolina accent, for example, or a Virginia accent. So it's an interesting thing to try to see if you can guess where someone might be from. And then a final question here is, what surprises visitors most about Alabama? What's the thing that doesn't match the stereotype? Well, I think that our history to some degree has fueled a stereotype. And the thing about stereotypes is that sometimes there can be some truth that underlies those. And so Alabama, the level of conflict and struggle that many of its people had to endure over a long period of time to survive and to fully realize their rights as Americans is absolutely a fundamental part of our history and who we are as a people. However, not to say that everything we've resolved all of our problems in that area. That's not the case. But even as we've been working through those challenges as Alabamians and as Americans, we've also been investing heavily in trying to create economic opportunity and success stories that help us to elevate opportunity and the quality of life for all people. So many people who come here are quite surprised by many of the things that I've told you about today, the variety and the diversity in the landscape, the fact that you can drive just a few hours and go from the mountains down to the beach, the beauty of the landscape, and I think in particular, many of the high-tech sectors and industries that have taken root here in the last 30 years and really proliferated is a source of surprise for some of our visitors. But the good news is it's a wonderful place to visit, and we would love nothing more than for you to come here either in person or virtually online and to continue your exploration of Alabama. And please, if you ever find your way to Montgomery, I hope that you will stop by and say hello. It's been a real treat to be with you today and with the American Center in Moscow. I want to mention that this is part of the American Center in Moscow's weekly speaker series continuing throughout 2026 on all 50 of the states. And you're invited to tune in again next Wednesday, July 22nd at 8 p.m. Moscow time for the next event in the series, which will be on the state of Colorado. Thanks again. It's great to be with you today.